Wow, there is. I just reading the Guardian this morning. I think I mentioned this, a month or two ago that it's essentially become my go-to newspaper now. I start with the Guardian, then I go to the Financial Times, then I go to the New York Times, then I go to various websites. But the Thomas Frank has a piece in today's Guardian that is so worth going out of your way to read. And I want to share some pieces of it with you. And I want to tie this to the French elections and to what happened here in Washington, D.C. yesterday that you did not hear about on the corporate news. So let's see, where to begin. Thomas Frank's piece. Thomas Frank, the piece is titled "The Midwest is Longing for Populism. Can Democrats Offer That in 2018? Thomas Frank, of course, he wrote What's the Matter with Kansas? His most recent book, Listen Liberal, is really worth reading. And the essential message of Listen Liberal is that the Republican Party has decided, decided back in the 70s and 80s to cater, at least with regard to legislative priorities, exclusively to the top 1%. They speak the language of guns and gays and gods, or hating gays and God fearing people and all that kind of stuff. But really, when it comes to legislation, the Republican Party is entirely the top 1%. But the Democratic Party, and Thomas Frank documents this just in excruciating detail in his book, Listen Liberal, has, at least since the 1990s, been the party of the top 10%. And the bottom 90% of America has been largely left behind. So Frank, he's apparently working on his next book. He just traveled through the Midwest. And he's a Midwesterner himself. He grew up in Kansas. I grew up in Michigan. We both know the Midwest. And he says, what I'm here to say is that the Midwest is not an exotic place. It's not a benighted region of unknowable people and mysterious urges. It isn't backward or hopelessly superstitious or hostile to learning. It's solid, familiar, ordinary America, and Democrats have no excuse for not seeing the wave of heartland rage that swamped them last November. Another thing that is inexcusable from Democrats, surprise at the economic disasters that have befallen the Midwestern cities and states that they used to represent. The wreckage that you see every day as you tour part of this country is the utterly predictable fruit of the Democratic Party's neoliberal turn. Now, I would add, the Republicans were really the ones driving this train. The Democratic Party signed off on it, and yeah, Bill Clinton signed NAFTA, but the majority of Democrats in the House and the Senate voted against it, something that Frank seems to miss in this piece. And I think it's important to insert. Trump and apparently, much of the Republican Party, this whole populist thing of, we hate free trade, we're going to renegotiate NAFTA, which Americans left, right, and middle are celebrating, is the classic and traditional Democratic Party position. Bill Clinton was opposed to his own party, opposed by his own party with NAFTA. NAFTA was passed through Congress with a majority Republican votes in the House, or Republican votes in the Senate, and a majority of the Democrats in the House and a majority of the Democrats in the Senate voted no on NAFTA. So anyhow, back to Thomas Frank. Every time our liberal leaders signed off on some lousy trade deal, figuring that working class people had, quote, nowhere else to go, end quote. I think that's a phrase from the guy who's now the mayor of Rahm Emanuel, when he was Barack Obama's chief of staff. They were making what happened last November a little more likely. Every time our liberal leaders deregulated banks and then turned around and told working class people that their misfortunes were all attributable to their poor education, that the only answer for them was a lot of student loans and the right sort of college degree, every time they did this, they made a disaster a little more inevitable. Well, again, the liberalization of the banks, the deregulation of the banks, yes, Clinton supported that, but the Democratic Party did not. And the majority of Democrats in the House and Senate voted against those things. Again, for the record. So anyhow, Thomas Frank, he concludes, well, he doesn't conclude, but he goes on to say, what we need is a Democratic Party and its media enablers. And they have been more firmly in the kind of neoliberal, Thomas Frank refers to it as the Davos crowd bank. And I would say, and this is not to pick on Clinton. There's a group within the Democratic Party, and they infected the Labour Party in the UK as well, which just destroyed Tony Blair, by the way. with his new labor, just like Bill Clinton had the new Democrats, which is the Democrats of Davos, right? The Democrats of multilateralism, the Democrats of deregulating the banks, the Democrats of international trade deals. What Thomas Frank writes is the party needs actually to change. It's not enough to just hear people's voices and feel their pain. The Democratic Party needs to understand that the enlightened Davos ideology they embraced over the years has done material harm to millions of their own former constituents. The Democrats need to offer something different next time, and then they need to deliver. Something with which I totally agree. But continuing along these lines, Barack Obama, President Obama, is going to give a speech to Cantor Fitzgerald, one of the investment banks, for $400,000. The op-ed, or excuse me, the official editorial position of The Guardian newspaper today, the headline, The Guardian view on Barack Obama, don't go chasing Wall Street cash. They say, they talk about how, he was a pretty good president and he can claim lots of credit. He killed bin Laden, the Iran nuclear deal, opening up Cuba. But now he has emerged that he's about to be paid $400,000 to speak at a Wall Street conference. This is a mistake. He should give the fee to charity, says the editorial board of The Guardian. What message does this send to young people, they write? That a career in politics is a way of getting rich? Tony Blair destroyed his reputation by chasing money. Hillary Clinton's standing among left-wing voters was sunk by her own highly paid speeches to Goldman Sachs. Mr. Obama does not need the money. He and Michelle have a two-book deal worth $65 million. His success rested on the symbolism of hope. Don't tarnish it now. I agree with that also. And then we get this fascinating piece. This is by Damon Linker, and it's over in The Week magazine and WEEK. The global elite think they're sitting pretty. How wrong they are. Democrats keep telling themselves Hillary Clinton really won the election, or would have if it hadn't been for Vladimir Putin and James Comey. Republicans keep patting themselves in the back about how much power they have at all levels of government. And the centrists in Europe are saying, Emmanuel Macron is going to win in France. You can almost hear the sentiments echoing down the corridors of political and economic power on both sides of the Atlantic. There's nothing to worry about. Everything's fine. No need for serious soul searching or changes of direction. Sure, populism's a nuisance, but we're keeping it at bay. We just need to stay the course, fiddle around the edges a little bit, and certainly not to give an inch to the racists and the xenophobes who are making trouble. We know how the world works. We can handle the necessary fine-tuning of the meritocracy. Then he goes on to point out that the folks who are saying this are I don't know if this is a word, the meritocracy-crats, whatever. Why wouldn't they think this way? They themselves are the greatest beneficiaries of the global meritocracy. And that very fact serves to validate its worth. They live in the urban centers that are booming with jobs in tech, finance, media that they can get because they went to the best colleges. And then he says the problem is that growing numbers of people here in the United States, in the UK, in France, and beyond don't see it like this at all. Or rather, they only see it from the outside, a position that looks very different. What they see is a system that's fundamentally unjust, rigged, and shot through with corruption and self-dealing. They see Marissa Mayer, the CEO of Yahoo, taking home a cool $186 million in stock after 5 years of basically screwing the company up. They see Henrique de Castro, who worked briefly for Meyer at Yahoo, putting $109 million in compensation for 15 months on the job. They see Roger Ailes and Bill O'Reilly getting fired from Fox News and then taking home tens of millions of dollars each in severance. They see former Democratic President Barack Obama sharing a $65 million book advance with his wife and earning $400,000 for a single speech, and gallivanting around the globe with David Geffen, Bruce Springsteen, Tom Hanks, Oprah Winfrey, and Bono. In Washington, they see a president, Trump, who promised to act as the people's voice, appointing a long list of billionaires and millionaires to top positions. They see the White House and Congress struggling to pass a health care bill that will leave millions more without insurance coverage at a time when the majority of Americans and a plurality of Republicans favor a single-payer system that would cover all. And he goes on in the piece, he says, unless something fundamentally changes, the gap separating these worlds will only increase economically, culturally, and psychologically. And then we go to France. In France, the two candidates right now, Emmanuel Macron is solidly in the neoliberal camp of, that that fraction of the Democratic Party that I was talking about earlier, who are actually in favor of deregulating banks and in favor of, you know, international trade deals and all these kind of things. That's Macron. He wants France to stay in the EU. He wants to keep the open borders so anybody can come, you know, anybody from any EU country can come live in France and work in France. He supports the offshoring of French jobs, literally. And, you know, saying, oh, you know, these are terrible factories. This is the argument that Bill Clinton gave us back in the 90s. Oh, you know, who wants to work at a factory? You should get, you know, go to college, get trained, get a white-collar job. And so here, this piece is this is published by Agence France Presse. And they say Le Pen has stolen some of the pro-European candidate's thunder by visiting. He was going to visit a factory. And it's here's the weird thing. It's a Whirlpool factory, U.S. company, that is scheduled to be moved to Poland. So all these French workers are about to lose their jobs. And Le Pen goes there, and she says, I'm going to close the borders, and I'm going to keep the jobs here. Marine Le Pen, yes, the Nazi, the fascist, the whatever you want to call her. And she's cheered by the workers. Macron shows up a couple hours later, and they boo him. This guy's 39 years old. He's a rising star, but he is a former investment banker, and he's totally neoliberal in all this. And so, you know, Agence France Presse, you know, they're saying, hey, you know, it's entirely possible. Le Pen has called for France to take back control of its borders from the European Union and deport all foreigners on a terror watch list, accusing Macron of being soft on security, among other things. So you got all that. And then meanwhile, I get this tweet from Keith Ellison, which is brilliant. On the same day Democrats were rallying around a $15 minimum wage, the Republicans unveiled a massive tax cut for corporations and the super rich. That should be the story, right? What Keith Ellison tweeted. But I didn't see it on MSNBC. I didn't see it on CNN. I'm sure it wasn't on Fox, that the Democrats yesterday rolled out in Congress and in a press conference a $15 national minimum wage. So large parts of the Democratic Party are moving in the right direction, but our corporate media refuses to even discuss it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And unless they can figure out a way to break through, this is a potential disaster in 2018 and 2020. If they can break through, it could be a huge success.